Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Culler. I'm president of the Ford Fund, the philanthropic arm of Ford Motor Company. Through Ford Fund's philanthropic work across the world, we are fortunate to meet many inspirational people and organizations helping to strengthen our communities and make people's lives better. Like any sector, women working in nonprofits have their own unique set of challenges. Did you know that women make up 75% of jobs in the nonprofit education and philanthropic sectors? And only 22% of nonprofits with budgets of more than $50 million have women CEOs? This is why today's discussion is vital. Today we will hear from an amazing group of women who are leading nonprofit organizations around the world and choosing to challenge the theme of this year's International Women's Day. Our panelists will share some of their struggles and triumphs as leaders in their field, how they are paving the way for younger women every day, and more importantly, how you can get involved with their organizations through the work we support through the Ford Fund. Before I introduce today's moderator, I want to thank Women of Ford for facilitating this year's International Women's Day programming, which extends throughout the month. Today's panel moderator is Melissa Bradley. Melissa is a tri-sector leader and managing partner at 1863 Ventures with more than 20 years of entrepreneurship, investment, and leadership experience. She is an adjunct professor at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University, where she teaches impact investing, social entrepreneurship, peer-to-peer economies, and innovation. Melissa has served as a presidential appointee under Presidents Clinton and Obama, and she is also our amazing partner for Her Impact, a program developed by the Ford Fund and 1863 Ventures to help women social entrepreneurs start and grow their businesses. Thank you, Melissa, and all of our panelists for joining us today. We look forward to a great conversation.
Welcome to Untitled Leaders who #choose to challenge. I guarantee you this is going to be an amazing conversation with women who are leading, who have certainly faced some adversity, but now most importantly, setting amazing examples and serving as role models for both women and individuals all across the country and the globe. Allow me to take a moment to introduce you to who we're going to learn and speak with today. First, we have Darian Driver Hudson. She is the president and CEO of the United Way for Southeastern Michigan. Dr. Darian Hudson is a high-energy nonprofit executive and lifelong educator. Before that, she was the superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools. We appreciate you and your service with our kids, and I'm sure you are probably happier that you are where you are versus running the school systems right now. Next up is Nuja Bazi. She is founder and CEO of Zaman International. She is an internationally recognized healer, humanitarian, and interfaith leader who left a six-figure salary as a critical care nurse to build Zaman International. Joining us from London, we have Dr. Susan Spurlock, who is founder of Primary Engineer. She founded that company in 2005 after training as a graphic designer and later as a secondary school teacher. We are thrilled to have you. And last but certainly not least, we have Cindy Benavides, who is the CEO of the League of United Latin American Citizens, what I know as LULAC. Ladies, welcome. So let's dive in and start hearing from you. I'd ask that each of you introduce yourself to the group. And since I read your amazing bios, don't tell us that stuff. Tell us, what is your connection to Ford, something that you're most proud of, and of course, to make some of us possibly jealous, where are you joining us from geographically?
Great, thank you, Melissa. And Cindy Marisol Maria Magdalena Benavides Villeda is my full name, but unfortunately that did not fit on my social security card. And so it's Cindy Marisol Benavides. And I'm joining you from Northern Virginia. Our headquarters is in Washington, D.C. And so these past few weeks, we've had tons of snow, not quite as much as Texas and the Midwest. And I'm a proud mom of two children, a 3- and 6-year-old. And, you know, my connection to Ford, the Ford Fund, is through LULAC, through our nonprofit and the work that we do through Ford Driving Dreams, where we've impacted close to 3,000 students across the country. And, you know, this program really seeks to build our Latino students. We know that today, 1 in 4 children in America are of Latino ancestry. And as we look at the growth of the Latino community today, we're 63 million strong. And in just 3 decades, we know that Latinos will be 130 million strong. What that means in the context of America is that 1 in 3 Americans will be of Latino ancestry. What I do for fun. A lot of folks joke around. I'm actually an introvert by nature. And so if you had me choose between reading a book on a hammock or being at a reception, I would choose being on a hammock reading a book, hands down. I am absolutely delighted to be here and be with this cohort of wonderful leaders who are creating impact across the world.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Dr. Spurlock, let's go to you next.
Hello, I'm actually not in London. I would like to be in London. I would like to be out doing amazing things, but sadly I'm at home in my kitchen in my slippers and my jacket, looking smart from the waist up. My office is in Burnley, which is a small town in Lancashire, which is driven by all sorts of aspiration and ambition for its children. Links to Forward are through the Global Fund, and we provide training for teachers to be able to deliver engineering in the classroom. And that's really where our link to Forward emanates, from the engineers that actually sit alongside those teachers to inspire them, to contextualize the project, to provide a career path, but mostly to inspire all children with the idea that this is something that they can do. That engineering, even if you don't become an engineer, the whole support ecosystem around an engineer, you need these skills, this drive and enthusiasm. So our links to Forward go back to around about 2017, and we engage around about 80 to 100 engineers on the projects that we do and feed that back through the classrooms and the teachers. So that's me. Devising programs to be able to inspire young people into engineering.
Next, I'm going to go to Dr. Nuja Bazi. How would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Hi, everyone. It's my honor and pleasure to be on the call with everyone and with all of these beautiful panelists. Thank you so very much, Melissa. My connection to Ford goes back 88 years, believe it or not. My mother and mother-in-law are both born at the Henry Ford Hospital that's located in Detroit, Michigan. And all of my siblings are. But in addition to that, our very deep roots with Ford in general is that my father was an assembly worker along with the majority of my family. And we lived in this little hub called the south end of Dearborn, where the first Rouge plant is. And, the industrial line began. So kind of on the border of that Dearborn, Detroit area. For folks like myself, apparently, when other people come from around the country to visit us, we apparently say Ford this, Ford that, Ford this, and it's such a part of the upbringing. My professional connection with Ford, of course, is the hospital itself in terms of my nursing background. But our organization, Zaman International, really enjoys a tremendous amount of volunteers who serve at the organization, which is located in Inkster, Michigan. And also, as part of the Ford Fund, we've been recipients, and Darian, you would know this, through the mobile food vans that we've been able to operate, and a tremendous backpack drive that provides for a lot of the children in the area. So we're kind of the Ford family, both personally and professionally.
I love that story. I love that. And last but not least, Dr. Darian Driver Hudson. Introduce yourself to us.
Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. I love hearing the stories. My Ford story is also very personal. I'm not a native of Detroit, but I'm Detroit made. And I had my first job as a fourth grade school teacher here in Detroit 20 years ago. And my principal, Patricia Brandenburg, was married to Marlton Brandenburg, still is. And he is the owner of Advantage Ford and Jorgensen Ford. And why that's important is because I managed, while I was a teacher, to have 2 car accidents in the time that I was there. And my first car was a 2002 Mercury Cougar. And then my second car was a 2004 Ford Mustang. And my Mustang, named Misty, stayed with me for 11 years through, I think we made it to 7 different states before she finally died on me after a nice 11-year run. And I had to switch over to General Motors because I have married into a GM family. But what I remember most is that no matter what kind of trials and ups and downs I was having as a teacher, Ford was a family company, and I saw that every day in my principal and in the owner of Jorgensen Ford, Mr. Brandenburg. And so that still stays with me. And coming back to Detroit 20 years later to run the United Way, what a gift that Ford actually has been the chair of our campaign for the 3 years that I've been here. And first it was Joe Hendricks and now Gary Johnson. And so just having the opportunity to work so closely with Ford, they are our largest campaign. Thank you all who are listening, who continue to donate to United Way. Ford has actually a really rich history with United Way. And 71 years ago, this is where payroll deduction actually started with Ford, UAW, and United Way of Southeastern Michigan. So just a rich history of being a family first company and also so committed to the community. So I appreciate Dr. Bazi talking about the partnerships that we have because there are so many, and just grateful for this opportunity. And again, Ford will always hold a very special place in my heart personally and professionally.
I love it. And so you started with family. So I want to dive in a little bit and ask each of you how you entered this work. For some, it's obvious because of your background, but you also could have been so many other places besides the nonprofit sector. So Dr. Spurlock, let's start with you. How did you get into this work?
I was a secondary school teacher. And in my role at secondary, I was seeing children come to me from primary school who had given up. They didn't see the reason for being in secondary school. They didn't understand why they should be there. None of it made any sense for them. And in England, there is something that's called NEETs, which is not in education, employment or training. And then I discovered that there was actually a group of children that were known as pre-NEETs. And these were children in primary schools that were identified as would be more likely to be NEETs when they progressed through to secondary. And I thought, this is criminal. It's criminal that we have a system whereby children can progress through and not progress out with any kind of road as to what next. And I'm quite an inquisitive, problem-solving type of a person. I'm quite creative. And I thought that actually the answer to this was in engineering. That if kids were engaged in engineering, if they knew this world existed out there that they could get involved in, would that make a difference? But it contextualized the learning. How could I approach that? And I started to look at engineering in primary school and realized that design technology, which is what we use effectively in England, wasn't being taught to teachers who were training. So they didn't know how to teach that topic in classrooms. They certainly didn't know how to deal with 30 kids with a small saw. So if I could help to address that, then I would be able to get engineering in the classroom. I would be able to make it sustainable. I could link it to engineers that would inspire the children. Let me at it. So I took a deep breath, put an application in funding in 2004, and knocked me down with a feather. I got it. And it was a bit like, careful what you wish for, because you had to stop everything else. All that other ambition that you had, all that other the direction that you kind of set yourself off on, that had to stop. It was like, no, we're going to invest in that idea, go and do it, and really have to kind of drive it after that. So it was quite a scary move, if I'm brutally honest. And you stick your chin out and say, I'm going to get this over the line. I'm going to do this because I can see the difference, and that's what's driven it. It's seeing that difference, hearing from the kids, and seeing the impact. So yeah, that's how I started on my particular path.
Well, I love that and appreciate when you say stick your chin out, because I think we're going to find out you still have to keep sticking your chin out.
I'm so sorry there, Melissa, cut out for a second there. So, it's a journey. I grew up with a family of matriarchs, and our home, even though we grew up poor, we always seemed to have people and guests at our home. So the work for me started, I feel like I was kind of raised to do it in many ways. My mom always had people sleeping at our house that didn't have a place to sleep. They weren't homeless, but maybe they were coming from another country, or she took in young students who didn't have a place. And our table was always full, and there seemed to be an abundance, even though there wasn't tremendous amount of means. So I say that to kind of just frame things. And I also have a brother who has muscular dystrophy. He's the longest living person with muscular dystrophy in our country. He's 67 years old. So I grew up taking care of my brother Sam. And so this idea of feeding people, it kind of stayed with me. Then as a nurse, you're feeding people. And you know, in leadership, you learn that there's this something that every single human being has. And it's with you when you're 4, and it's with you when you're 40, and it stays with you throughout your life. So somehow I was able to tune into this, but the actual story began with the end of life work I do, and I'm a clinical transcultural nurse. That means I navigate the healthcare systems between the system itself and the patients and their needs, religious needs, cultural needs, so on and so forth. So I found a baby that was dying in a laundry basket, and seeing the baby dying in a laundry basket was heart-wrenching, pivotal. I left the front porch of that family and just had a gut-wrenching experience, cried a lot, and called my mom. And so we got to do something about this. That led to the work around poverty, refugee resettlement initially. But, you know, refugees got resettled pretty quickly after 2 years of, you know, some support. But what I found was that there was still this aching population of single mothers trying to raise their children, living in extreme poverty in our area in southeastern Michigan. Majority, like 98%, living below $12,000 a year. That's in today's stat. So when I was looking at these women, and I thought to myself, my goodness, their challenges and their barriers are huge. I also have a background in open heart surgery. And so between all of the skills, much like Dr. Susan's talking about, you pull those skills together. And I'm like, listen, we're going to bypass poverty. This isn't going to happen on my watch. Maybe we can't solve for all of hunger, but we can bypass that vessel of no food and put food. The same thing with homelessness and hunger and all these just different things, education, skill sets that women need in order to raise their children and break that cycle of intergenerational poverty. I live it, breathe it, and it's in my DNA. And I agree with you, Dr. Susan. It's about putting your chin out there and just making sure you're doing it every day on the front lines.
Wow, well, thank you so much. That's such an amazing story, and congratulations to the family member who is still here. Dr. Hudson, what are your thoughts on this?
These stories are so inspiring. I thank everyone for your vulnerability today. I wanted to start, I have been a lifelong educator, and that desire to teach and to always want to be around others who are learning came from my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. And she was a teacher. She was one of 12, and she was the only one in her family to go to college. And just from day one, I remember she surrounded us with books. When we went on vacations to visit her, we were going to museums, we were going to the library, we were, going to science museums, anything that she could do to make sure that we were excited about learning. My sister is 4 years older than I am, and she's a doctor, and she was always reading, always studying, always learning. And so those things got passed down to me. And I just couldn't see myself doing anything else but teaching. And my father is also a health services administrator. So he ran a hospital, a nursing home, a community health center. And the thread line in all of this is, everywhere that we went, my father was always serving Black communities. He was always serving communities that had significant disadvantages, and did so with such integrity and with such a heart and mind for people, and serving those who may not have had a voice, but never with pity, but with empowerment. And so having those two worlds merging together, my parents, my grandparents, all were church. They're still church-going people, very strongly rooted in faith. And so you realize that being an educator is also a part of ministry, and serving others before yourself. And if you had told me that I'd be in nonprofits, I never would have believed you. I couldn't see myself doing anything else but being an educator. And when I was a superintendent, I was very active with United Way. I was on the board. I chaired the volunteer engagement committee. And some of the most most difficult times that I remember, whether it was a child being killed from gunfire, from different health issues that were affecting our community, teen pregnancy prevention, just anything that you can think of. United Way was there. And, I said, for all the things I'm trying to do in education, I'm just cracking the surface because how can I have a conversation with my children about performing well in math, performing well in English or in reading if they're having so many challenges at home? And so, my husband and I used to talk all the time. I said, well, you love United Way so much. Why don't you see if they have a job? And one day I just finally did that. And the job was here in Detroit, which is where my husband's from. And so all roads pointed me back here. And it's been very unique and special to be back here 20 years later in the place where I got my start as a teacher. But just the reminder that there's still so much work to do. And the only way that we'll get there is through these partnerships. So every point of my life, all the places that I've been, it's still strongly rooted in this passion for learning, for teaching, and also being really strongly rooted in my faith. And so it feels like an honor, and it's still a journey, a very long way to go. But you just realize how blessed you are to be in these types of positions, to be able to help other people and empower them to also be able to help themselves.
Every place that you ladies are is truly blessed to have you, and I can feel the service coming through. Cindy, I have no doubt a similar story, so tell us how you got into.
Thank you for that, Melissa. And I will say that I am connecting so much with the stories from everyone. And, I would say that as I got older, I started reflecting a lot in terms of my own ancestry. And I have a father that can talk for days on end in terms of our own history and talk about just the impact created. And although my paternal grandfather, never had the title of mayor, he was the mayor ad hoc of his village. And, he always focused on solutions and taught my father, who then taught me, that our biggest title is being a child of God. And that when we put our ego aside and we really focus on the collective is when we can create the biggest impact. And I remember, being here in the US as an immigrant and, coming to the US as an undocumented immigrant and certainly understanding that fear that so many individuals feel. Whether it was, picking up cans in the streets of Los Angeles and then cleaning houses with my mom to be able to make ends meet. Servant leadership was just something that was taught to us, even though we didn't at that time as a young woman recognize my own circumstances. And similar to Nisha, our door to our kitchen was always open. We always had individuals come through our house that we didn't know, but just knew that needed help, or maybe needed kind words, or maybe needed just uplifting for that day so that we could make it through. And I will tell you that I formally started organizing actually on the campus of Virginia State University. I had the privilege to go to a historical Black college and start organizing in our African American community. And what I've learned is that so many of us, regardless of what our ethnicity or what our race is, face so many similar challenges. And, that has really stayed with me. And I think as we're living in this era of uplifting our communities collectively and understanding also the unique challenges so many of our communities face, that, we have to also take a step back as leaders and understand our own roles and also question ourselves. And I remember being at Virginia State and Professor Baker asking us, who comes and sits at your dinner table? And does it reflect that diversity that you propose, that you uplift? And so he was making sure that we were walking the talk and making sure that we as young students understood systemic racism and systemic institutional racism in our country. And I will tell you, Melissa, that every day as the youngest leader leading a national legacy organization, I wake up to protect and defend our Latino community. And I remember the words of my grandfather that I am worthy, that I am a child of God, and that, the most present is how do we collectively think of how we improve our communities and how we do this in a manner that respects our ancestry, and I think also with a lot of grace. I always remember something that the former First Lady Michelle Obama always said, which was, when people go low, we go high. And I really do live by that mantra in terms of understanding how we can make that collective impact in our country.
I love that, and such a powerful story. And many of you alluded to your triumphs, but also some of the challenges. And so I want to take us down that path for a second. I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with you, Dr. Spurlock. Tell us one challenge you've experienced as a woman leader and how you overcame it.
Well, I'm going to be brutally honest here, Melissa, and I'm going to let you into a little bit of a secret. The biggest challenge I had was with my dad. So my dad didn't think girls could be engineers. And given that he was an engineer, and, you know, I was pretty good at maths and physics and really quite liked the whole idea of it, he absolutely wouldn't entertain it. And that was at a time in the UK where if you wanted to take physics I could do, maths I could do, but I couldn't do tech drawing. And he would not stand up for me on it. So I couldn't become an engineer. And actually, my life's work is dedicated to proving him wrong, because this is what I do. I get girls into engineering. Thank you very much. But I would, a proper kind of a challenge for me when I started work was that people wanted me to change the name of the organisation, because they said primary schools were too young, that kids in primary weren't worth working with, that we needed to work with kids that were 14 and older to get them into engineering. And I had to stand my ground about the importance of primary schools and the importance of primary children, and that if you get that foundation right, everything changes. Everything changes. You've got children then that are thinking about things that they can do. And that it wasn't just that we had to explain that to teachers. It was the people on the periphery. It was funders that you were talking to and saying, but yeah, I get where you're coming from, but in 10 years, that 10-year-old will be 20. You know, that you do plans for longer periods of time that actually encompass this age group. You need to think about it. And there was a point where I had to make a decision of being very political about it and trying to get change, or proving it. And I went for the proving it. I thought, I'm going to put my head down, chin out. I'm going to go into those schools. I'm going to do the support that I can. I'm going to put the engineers in there. I'm going to provide those stories for those children. And I'm going to actually prove it later that this is where you should start. And now, of course, everybody recognises how important primary children are in the bigger scheme of things. And bizarrely, we even have a program called Early Years Engineer for preschoolers, because it even starts earlier than that. But that was my biggest challenge, in fairness, was actually trying to get people to understand that the work that we were doing was at the right point, that it was important. And primary voices, children's voices are really, really valid.
Well, congratulations to you. As a parent, I know how hard it is to hear that we're not supportive. So congratulations to you. That's for sure. Dr. Hudson, tell us about a challenge that you were able to overcome. I'm sure there were many.
There were. So actually, I'm going to give more of a themed challenge than a specific incident. If you really want to know, you can Google. There's quite a bit of history there on some of the challenges I've been through. But one that's been really consistent that I don't think enough people talk about, and it's definitely below the radar, is being underestimated. When I came into the superintendency in Milwaukee, and even some of my roles before that, I was always the youngest person. I was 36 when I became superintendent, on top of being Black, on top of being a woman. And so there was this feeling of people just truly didn't know what to do with me. They'd walk up to me and they'd ask me, are you a teacher? I remember one time I was in a high school, somebody actually asked me if I was a student. And it was one of those things where it's like, come on, I'm not that young. But there was just this assumption that there's no way this person, even with a degree, for 2 degrees from Harvard and 1 from Michigan and 1 from Spelman, could be in this role. And one of the things that I noticed, and this has been here in my current position as well as when I was superintendent, is when you start these roles, you hear a litany of all of the things that your predecessors have done, whether they were good or bad, whether they love them or whether they despise them. You hear this long list of all of these wonderful things that they did. And how are you going to measure up? How are you going to compare? You need to be careful because this person did this, and people are going to be watching you to see if you're going to do that. And when I really think about it, it makes me very angry because you wonder, do men have to hear all this? I doubt that. But the best way that you silence that is you show people better than you can tell them. I've always been someone that leads with facts, that believes in having data to support any arguments or positions that I have. And when you do have those breakout moments, whether it's, turning around a state takeover attempt at a school district or pulling together $37 million for COVID relief efforts in one city, the more and more that you do that, it changes conversations. But it's unfortunate that we have to work so hard to demonstrate that we are capable and that we're more than qualified to be in the positions that we're in, regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of race. The other thing I just wanted to leave with that challenge and how you overcome it is listening for the people who don't put you in categories. So there oftentimes will not look like you. Sometimes they will, but I've learned also when you start to discern who's worrying about all these qualities of someone else and who's truly investing in you. And those are the people that you have to lock arms with, because those are the ones that are going to fight with you, and they're there to fight for your kids, for your families, and for your neighborhoods. But I would say that's an ongoing theme that I've noticed now, 2 different CEO roles. And I pray for the day where you don't have to demonstrate or prove that you belong in these roles, that it's understood and expected, and from day one people are standing there ready with you to make the change that you were hired and brought there to do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and I certainly hope that day comes soon, because clearly you have waited way too long. You have certainly earned much better. Cindy, why don't you share a little bit about a challenge and how you overcame it?
Thank you for that, Melissa. And I can so relate to Darian and what she's saying. And, I think this theme of being underestimated is something that has been constant in my life. And, to give you an example, I was appointed at the age of 23 as the youngest cabinet member to serve in Virginia state government. Serving Governor Tim Kaine at that time. And I remember, Melissa, that, in the different cabinet meetings that we would have, when I would say something, it would be like, kind of look at me, who is this young girl? Is she the intern? And then turn around and back to the meeting. And so I learned really early on to create partnerships and alliedships. And I remember I would go, and my mom always said, you always go to the top, hija. You always go to the top. So I was like, okay, I know the governor is there, but let me go to his general counsel. And so the general counsel to the governor became my biggest champion. And sometimes I knew that if I said it, because I was so young, that it would not resonate. But if he said it, it was the greatest, brilliant idea. And so I learned really early on to work with allies and building those networks to get things done, and having the meeting before the meeting before the meeting, so that the outcome that I wanted at the age of 23 would actually happen. And so I would say, this theme of being underestimated in all my roles, I've always been the youngest in the room, sometimes the only Latina in the room, always the only immigrant in the room. And, even in this role, Melissa, I will tell you that what is clear to me is that words matter. And, sometimes, individuals will try to push their own misconceptions and perceptions on you. And, the other day I was told that I was being stubborn. And I was very clear that my job is to be assertive, and it's to lead as well as to manage the day-to-day. And I think when we're able to rectify a situation in a very assertive and professional way, individuals begin to understand the power of words. And I remember my maternal grandmother so clearly. When I was young, she would say, yes, you are my little princess, but you too are my warrior. And, those 2 words, yes, here is her princesita, but I'm also her warrior. And always looking at how we work together in community has stayed with me. And then I would just say, Melissa, that I think this also points to the fact that there's underrepresentation of women of color. And, so happy that, we're seeing that increase in terms of having more women of color be in CEO roles. But if you look at corporate America, only 2% of CEOs are of Latino origin. And when you start looking at corporate diversity, that's also an issue. And then you look at nonprofit diversity, right? And the fact that there's still so much growth to happen. And, just to give you a very singular example with LULAC, I came in 2.5 years as CEO, making me the first Latina to lead this organization in 90 years. And so it tells you about the importance that we as women have, the barriers, the doors, the mountains that we're still climbing to pave the way for those that are still with us, for my daughter, America, who's 3 years old, and hoping one day, Darian, that she too will not be confronted with the challenges that women still face in 2021 in terms of just having a seat at the table.
Wow, I wish you could see me because I'm getting goosebumps. So this is so powerful. And I think that you touched upon something, is that women in and of ourselves are a very diverse group, and our experiences are varied. And it's important that we take that into context. Dr. Bazi, I'd love to bring you in and have you share a challenge that you've overcome.
Thank you, Melissa. These stories are all so phenomenal, and I feel such a kinship here. The one that I want to speak about, I think I'm going to also be a little brave, Susan, and go out on a limb here. As I'm listening to you, wasn't what I was going to choose, but now I'm going for it, that authentic self. What's been most difficult for me is the ask. And it's really interesting because I talk about this with, close friends of mine. So, growing up as an Arab American and the cultural roles that, you are assigned, oftentimes it was the cultural role of, I couldn't be the doctor because I couldn't go to Wayne State. So I needed to be the nurse, right? And so all of these assignments that happen to you as you're growing up in a bicultural family. But one of the things that my father really enforced, even though we grew up with very little means, my father is like such a patriot. He was in the army, all of this. And my father would work 2 and 3 jobs just so that we wouldn't go on government assistance. That was a really big value for him. He used to say, we may not be good, but other people have it way worse than we do. And so he would never put his hand out. And so I learned that kind of, it's shameful to ask. And I would wake up, we have 6 siblings. Even though they had nothing, they would put money on the kitchen counter for us as we were going to college so we wouldn't have to ask them. If a wedding was coming up, he would put a little bit of money on the side and say to me, go buy yourself a new dress for this wedding. So now in the nonprofit world, you have to ask. And I'm the CEO who I grew up doing, not asking. So the challenge for me, and it continues to be a challenge, is knowing that I'm not asking for myself, crushing pride and getting rid of all of those tapes in my head, and understanding that it is my responsibility to ask. And I am an ambassador for this organization, and we've helped 2.5 million people. If I don't ask, then where will that come from? But I've had to really gain a lot of courage and do a lot of self-talk and a lot of erasing of some of the cultural tapes that I've grown up with to learn that, no, it is okay to ask, and I'm asking for the benefit of others. Now, in addition to that, I'll just take a minute to talk about this. Also, I think culturally the challenges is there aren't as many women of Arab American descent that are leading, and my family's been in America 135 years, by the way, that are leading as I'm leading. The very last thing is vision. I have tremendous vision. It's sometimes been very difficult for me to sit, no matter what role I was playing in my different career opportunities, sitting at the table, and I could see something 3, 5 years out, 10 years out, but everybody wants to keep me stuck where they wanted me to be because they couldn't go on that journey. So the other challenge is, and I want people who are on this to really understand, if you are a visionary, you hang on to that with your heart and soul. And that is so critically important. It's what makes the difference. Without visionaries, we can't travel. So I'm done having people hold me back. They're either coming along, or if they're not interested in coming along, that's okay too. But I'm going. I'm going to see this through.
I love that. I love the tenacity and the resilience. So we have just over 15 minutes left, and you all are just sharing so much wisdom. So I want to get in at least two more questions. And the next one is, you've all spoken about people's impact, whether positive or not, in your lives. Can you share the best advice you've ever received that worked, or the advice you received that wasn't the best, and what you've learned from it? And let's start with you, Dr. Spurlock.
Right. Well, the best advice I ever got is going to seem rather simplistic after listening to some of these incredible journeys that I've just shared. But the best advice was never answer somebody else's question. And the idea of that is never assume you know what somebody will say. And I think that when we've spoken to, as you were saying, about asking funders to join you in your vision, into your world. And there's a chance that you might assume you know what they're going to say. You might assume you know why they want to join you or why they want to support you. And it's standing back and letting people answer their own questions. And there is that natural kind of, oh, I know what they'll say. No, you don't. You might have an inkling, but you can be very surprised by what people will ask. And one of the projects that we have is where children ask engineers questions about what they do and why they do it. And you assume that you know why children might be interested in becoming an engineer. But it's not until you listen to the questions that they ask that you understand that actually some of the things they want to know have got nothing to do with what you thought they wanted to understand. We had a beautiful interview, and I will say this very, very quick, Melissa, so that you don't get caught. We had a beautiful interview where a young girl asked a question of a female engineer, Sarah Haslam at Dunton Ford in the UK. And Sarah done this beautiful presentation about what she does, and this little girl had sent in a question saying, do you get to tell the boys what to do? And Sarah was really taken aback and went, well, yes, I do actually. And then came the killer line, but do you enjoy it? And it was perfect. I mean, who knew that that was something that a young girl thinking about engineering might consider as a question? And it's low-key, and I know it's low-key, but it is about listening and waiting for people to answer questions that you put to them, because that's what's going to actually give you much more information. So that would be my best bit of advice to pass on.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hudson. And then we're going to go to Dr. Bazi.
Okay. I'm just chuckling. I appreciate these stories so much. So the one I wanted to share about advice was actually from one of my mentors. I wrote my dissertation on the resilience of Black women superintendents. And so I had this circle of 8 women who just wrapped their arms around me the moment I became a superintendent. And one of them had said to me, it's only leadership if someone is following you. And don't ever forget that, because, I was the first woman also being a superintendent. And so you all know this, you get awards coming out of the walls, right? You're always being acknowledged for different things. And you have to remember, you wouldn't have any of that if you didn't have a team that was with you, that was behind you, that was beside you. And that's been really important. This is a shared success. Anything or that I've been acknowledged for, or any reward I've received, is because I've had an amazing team that's been doing this work with me. And that's been really important, because there are times when you can get so far out there, people feel like they can't touch you anymore, they can't reach you, or you can actually think that all those awards are important and forgetting the mission and forgetting the people that do that with you. The other part of your question where you said it didn't always work for you. So here's the catch. Because when you're thinking your team and you're talking about the people that are, riding with you, doing all this work with you, there are always going to be some names that are left out. And sometimes it's an unintentional, but then sometimes it's very obvious who's not with you. And sometimes those people can become very, resentful and start to work against you. And so having to be mindful, you got to figure out how to bring everybody to the table. You need all ideas, even if they're not ones that you agree with. And everyone can be a part of the team. Everyone has a role to play in making the situation better. And that was a really important learning for me because I missed sight of that. Being so concerned to thank the folks who were always in and with me. I was like, wait a minute. You got to bring in the folks who aren't. You have to make sure that they also feel that they can be a part of the change because they have something to offer as well. So I guess that's a both and piece of advice for you, Melissa.
Dr. Bazi, and then we're going to go to Cindy.
All right. I'll be real quick. So these are kind of philosophies. One comes from a saint that I love a lot. And he says, it's not the good deed you do, it's how fast you do it. So that is consistently in my head and driving me. The other thing is this incredible woman who died very young. She was actually executed for her leadership. And she says, before she passed away, she says, it shall not be that time will leave its imprint on me. Rather, I will leave my imprint on time. And so that philosophy, I apply it to Zaman, and I say to myself, this is what Zaman should do. And it actually, Zaman means time. So it's about how we spend our time in the stewardship of others as a human family. But the opposite issue, the not so good advice is, I understand this is the process piece because I'm not so good at the process piece. I need the team to do the process piece, and they're so wonderful at that. But when people have told me, you've got to slow down, you've got to get the process in place. It's not that it's bad advice. It's just that I have the grit for the vision. So I think you have to have the vision and then find the right people to put together the process, but don't give up on the vision because it has to be there to lead the rest of the system, the ecosystem of what you're trying to do.
I love that. Thank you. And Cindy, why don't you share a piece of advice for us?
Sure. And I would say, Melissa, from a cultural aspect, I come from a community, a Latino community that is very humble and that is very grateful. And if you can just imagine when we go into a grocery store and there's someone outside giving a pamphlet, we'll take the pamphlet, we'll keep it in the car. We might even walk it into our house and we may actually read it. And, one of the things that I learned when I went to Virginia State, and I'm so grateful that I had professors who really focused on my brain and my mind. And one of the things that they taught me was that we must uneducate ourselves to re-educate ourselves, to break the shackles of poverty and to break the shackles of our own mind. And I remember that so thoughtfully, Melissa, and I still live by that because I have learned to question. I question the sources in this era of misinformation and disinformation. I've learned to raise my voice and to find my voice, to be able to protect and to defend and to push and advance the Latino community. And I think as a Latina, as a woman, as a millennial, as a mother, as all the hats that I wear and some of the hats that I choose not to wear, this importance of understanding our own history in America, where oftentimes the contributions of our Native American community, of our immigrant community is left out. This misperception of who Latinos are in America, people forgetting that, before there was Texas, it was Texas, and before it was Colorado, it was Colorado, and before it was New Mexico, it was Nuevo Mexico, and that through the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty, our Mexican ancestors became U.S. citizens and were granted their land only to be taken away. And so oftentimes when people think of Latinos, they think of immigrants, not understanding that we were here before that border crossed us. We were here with our Native American community. And so, I'm so thankful that I am in a place, Melissa, where I have taken the time to uneducate myself, to re-educate myself, and understand also the importance of the economic impact and the shackles of poverty on all of our communities. and how instead of going forward, so many of our communities of color are falling behind in terms of the income and wealth gap and the access to income to be able to have ventures, to be able to create even more business and to be able to provide those opportunities. And so I think this is something that's really close to my heart and that really has helped and shaped the voice that I have as someone that leads a civil rights organization.
Let the church say amen. Or wherever you may worship. Thank you so much for that. As we wind down, I want to ask this last question, and I think it's important for you all, but probably more important for those who are watching. What are 1 to 2 ways that interested people can be supportive of you and or your work? Because you're doing such amazing things. So Dr. Hudson, let's start with you, and I'll do a round robin.
Okay, if you see someone who needs help or someone asks you for help and they don't know where to start, please have them call 211. It's just 3 digits that they have to remember, and it's across the country. So no matter where you're listening to this, have them dial 211, and that's a good place for them to start. We know so many of our brothers and sisters are still suffering amidst this pandemic. And if you're interested in getting involved, first, thank you for all of you who participated in the campaign in December at Ford. You hear us say all the time, give, advocate, volunteer. You can go to UnitedWaySEM.org. We are approaching volunteer engagement month in April, and there are tons, literally, and I can't think of a better word because there are so many opportunities for people to get involved through volunteerism, and we still need your advocacy. We know there's been a change in leadership in Washington, but we still need your help, and so you can also go to Stand With United Way, and you will see a number of different issues that we are advocating for.
Thank you so much. Dr. Bazi.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much. So, of course, we have this term called Zamanitarian. So I would invite everyone to become a Zamanitarian and to consider going to our website to also become a donor. Of course, it's www.zamaninternational.org. And in terms of volunteers, Zaman really benefits from the professional volunteers as well as volunteers who are committed and not specifically their profession. So we do have about 6,000 volunteers, and we're always adding to that list. Ford has been a tremendous volunteer partner. So we kindly ask you to go to our website and to sign up as a volunteer, become a donor, and stay committed to helping. Zaman is not just in Michigan, it is in 20 other countries. But I ask you to really join the fight against poverty and to lift women and their children wherever we can in the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we've got the United Way, we've got Zaman International. Cindy, we're going to go to you next.
So the first ask would be join us as a volunteer, like so many have said, lulac.org/volunteer, because we could always use someone who can mentor our children. 400% increase in failing grades for Latino children alone during the pandemic. So if this is something that you're interested in, please join us as a volunteer. We're always looking for advocates to harness our next generation of leaders who are learning to find their voice, who are learning how to advocate, how to do that ask, and how to share their journeys and stories. And then lastly, I would say that I grew up with so many women mentors who always said, to extend a hand and open that door for others coming. So don't do it for me, but do it for those individuals that are next to you, that are close to you. And, something that I've learned from Miss Frankie Hughes, who's someone that I love and adore and has been a longtime mentor, is, when you're given the choices of walking towards fear or walking towards love, choose love. Choose love, and always, always remember those that are standing near and around you and open those doors for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Spurlock.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, my kind of message is that we are a UK-based organisation, and if any of you would like us to come and talk to you in other countries, in other places, then please do say. I think that children need to be inspired wherever they are. Primary school children need to have the skills to be able to think about what they do next. Engineering is a career that we need as a world, not just, in the short term, but in the long term. And that investment starts in primary schools. And that's where the change will really be. we've been super fortunate with the way that we've worked with Ford in the UK, with Dunton, and some of the people there have just been extraordinary. And what's been beautiful is seeing how engineers have been inspired by children, not just inspiring children, but being inspired by children and making a difference. So our website is www.primaryengineer.com. Drop us a line, drop me a line, just have a chat, and we would really welcome your stories and how we can share those with children everywhere. But thank you very much for inviting me on this. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to everybody else, to be fair. Thank you.
So thank you all. I have truly been humbled to be in this great company. Every single piece of advice I'm going to take for myself and share with others. I will say, when you were speaking and we were talking about the challenge, I remember when I went to the SBA and to ask for a loan for my business, and they told me no. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, there's 3 reasons. I said, well, give them to me. I know I can fix them. And they said, I'm a woman, I was Black, and they didn't know any successful women in financial services. And so if there had been more of your stories, hopefully either I would have been better prepared or that would not have happened. And so I'm grateful because, like many of you, I'm honored to be here as part of 1863 Ventures, and we work with Ford Fund, like all of you do, to help women. We specifically help women entrepreneurs through their Impact program. So I just want to say that I'm going to carry so many nuggets with that program to Her Impact as we continue to talk to women and remind them of all the work that you're doing. What you said to me today was that women are great problem solvers. We lead with empathy. We focus on the long term. We find and use our voice. We leverage data. We redefine ourselves and our communities. Your message was, do not underestimate us. There is nothing we cannot do, and we choose love. So I really want to thank you, Dr. Hudson, Dr. Bazi, Dr. Spurlock, Cindy. I know all of our paths will cross again. And for anybody who is watching, please contact the Ford Fund for more information on how to support these great women and so many others. Thank you all, and have a wonderful, wonderful Women's Celebration.